What's up, Internet? Robert Teegarden back again with another part of this how to video edit for beginners in Adobe Premiere series that I've been doing. I apologize if there's any ambient noise. I've got the whole family home because of the name that shall not be said, the I know people are getting censored for even thinking of that here, so I'm just gonna keep bleeping out every time I say because I don't want to get in trouble. So today what I'm doing right now is I was in the middle of a project, started to export stuff in mass, and realized that this would be an excellent part of our little series that we've got going on here, because a lot of times when I'm doing bigger projects that I do often, where you do full day shoots, multi-day shoots, and you have a lot of deliverables that are necessary, not just in one format, a 16:9, but also in different sizes and aspect ratios. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll batch export them. I did a video a while back on how to export the fastest in Adobe Premiere. I'll put it up here somewhere. And so this kind of ties into that. I do all of this stuff through Adobe Media Encoder. But with that being said, it's definitely something that I think is, I've got some cool techniques that would speed up your workflow and also give you a better idea of why you're exporting in mass like this, and the things that you can do in Media Encoder. That's my kid. I can't do anything about it this time, guys. Everyone's locked in the house. So we're just gonna jump on in. I said it. I hate when people say jump on in. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take you into the project that I'm working on in Premiere, and I'm gonna walk you through exactly how I would start to export these things and the different reasons as to why I would do that in Adobe Media Encoder. Okay, cool. So here we go. I've got this project here, and if you haven't seen it, you should definitely check out my Auto Reframe the Right Way video that I put up. What I had here is a project that I shot in 16:9, and I have all of these edits up in this way too. I'm gonna mute out my sound right here. I've got all of these edits that are set up here. I've already actually exported all of these 16:9 versions using the Adobe Media Encoder in the same exact theories and process that I'm gonna use here with you guys. But I started out with this one. I used my auto reframe right here, so you can see now that says 4:5. Actually, I need to go back up here in my reframe. I need to rename so I keep everything nice and organized, because I'm definitely all about that life. So I have my 4:5, and so I went through, I rendered out everything in my 4:5. I went back and I reviewed all of the auto reframing that it did, killed the keyframes that I didn't like, which this one kind of had quite a bit of. And so when I did that, I made sure that the spacing of things were correct and how I wanted them to be. You guys watch the other video, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So now it's time to start to export these things. And so you want to go ahead and render them all out. You want this green bar all on the top. In order to do that, you go up to your sequence, you go to render in and out, or render effects in and out. You can do this for multiple sequences at the same time, like I've mentioned. You would just kind of highlight all the sequences on the project bin. You go up to sequence and go render in and out, and it would bring up your render window, and it would say rendering 1 of 3, 1 of 5, however many you selected. It's a really handy tool, so you can kind of set a bunch of sequences to render on their own, go get a cup of coffee, do a workout, go have some fun. I don't know, whatever you want to do. But I've already done that here. And so now what I want to do is just start to export some of these things. The reason that this first file looks different is that I've actually flattened this multicam sequence. I'll go over that in a different video. For right now, that's the reason why this one in particular looks different. But what I do is now that I have everything rendered out, it's ready to be exported. I'm going to click my endpoint. I'm going to go to the end of this sequence. You can kind of use your arrow keys to get up and down here. If I go up, then it's going to take me backwards in my sequence. If I go down, it's going to take me forward in my sequence. And so then I'll hit my out point. Now, the thing here that's interesting to note is that if you really zoom into this sequence, you'll start to see that it's not actually at where my cursor is. It's a frame past where my cursor is. So lesson number 1 in this tutorial is that you actually want to go to the end of your sequence, right? I'm gonna go all the way to the end of my sequence. Come on, buddy. And then I'm gonna go back 1 frame, and then I'm gonna hit my out point, because then it's actually gonna be at the end of the clip that I want to export. It's the end of that clip, and you'll see that this is the nice full 4:5 frame that I'm exporting here. The next thing, once I'm in my timeline window, which you can hit Shift 3 in order to get to. I'm gonna hit Control M on my keyboard, or you can also go up to File, go to Export, and go to Export Media, but you can see right there it's got that Control M. So as you guys probably know at this point, if I don't have to touch a mouse, especially go through a bunch of drop-down menus, I'm gonna try and do that as much as possible. So Control M on my keyboard is gonna bring up my export settings window. Now there's a bunch of other formats and presets that you can go into. For the most part, what I do is I'm gonna match source high bit rate. I'm gonna go to one of these YouTube settings down here, or I'm gonna create some version of my own in this particular one. Right now I want some type of custom because I know that I've already tweaked some of these settings. I'm not gonna go over all of these settings now. It's kind of above what the scope of this tutorial is. Just know that's one of those 3 things that I'm going to be doing, right? So I'm in custom. The next thing I'm gonna do is fix my output name. Now remember from my previous video of how I set up all my folders, everything's gonna live within the project itself, the project file itself. Then I'm gonna go to my renders folder. And remember, I had already rendered out all of these individual clips themselves from a 16:9 point of view. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna keep the same naming convention. I'm gonna say protein, but J is the guy that this first set of sequences is all about. So I'm gonna have that and 4x5_1.0. Now the reason I do 1.0 is that 1.0 is the first version, the first setup of clips that I'm gonna have that I'm sending over for approval to the client. If everything's cool, then I keep that 1.0. If they make little tweaks, say to let's make the text different, can we move just certain tiny things around, then the next set of things I'm gonna send over to them is gonna be 1.1, 1.2. So if smaller notes that happen to just basic effects are what I changed, then that's 1 point something, and I'll change the thing after the decimal point. If it's a totally different clip, a completely different idea, and we've changed it, then I'll change it to 2.0 or 3.0. So that's the reason I name it that way. It helps me keep track of what type of video I sent over to them and where I am in the notes and approval process. So I'm gonna leave it at this one. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go back, I'm gonna actually copy this whole sequence right here, so that, or sorry, copy the whole file name right here, so that the next time I can paste it into this next video in the sequence and just change the ending suffix, the 1.0, 2.0, etc. So I'm gonna copy that here. I'm gonna click save. The next thing I'm gonna go down my video effects settings. I'm gonna change, usually I have to change this target bitrate to 16, but because I've already done this for the 16:9 sequence, it's keeping it the same here for that sequence as well. I'm gonna click use maximum render quality, and then I'm gonna hit Q. Now, for those of you that don't know, once I hit Q, it's going to open up the Adobe Media Encoder, and it's gonna start to load things into the Adobe Media Encoder, AME, and I can do a bunch of fun things in that window as well that are really useful for me when I'm exporting in mass like this, like batch exports. So as it's kind of opening itself up, I'm gonna be able to show you exactly what I can do and how I can change things, right? So it's about to get added to the queue. Now we see that it's added to the queue. The first thing we can do is I can go in, right click, and click duplicate. So for some reason, I need to make multiple versions of the same video, the same export. Let's say I need an H.264. I need a QuickTime ProRes 422. I need different kind of presets or resolutions of things. I can just click duplicate, and then I would click on the H.264, and I can go in and change my settings to be QuickTime ProRes 422 HQ. And so now instead of going back into Premiere, re-exporting everything all over again, I can just duplicate something within the Adobe Media Encoder window, and then I can start to add things that way. I actually don't need another export, so I'm just gonna delete this here. Cool. And then the other thing is my output file name. Let's say for some reason I'm moving fast, or I realize I actually need to put this in a different folder. I click this hyperlink. It's going to bring me to the folder, the directory that this thing is going to deposit itself in after it's done rendering. So I can change that here if I need to, but we did it right the first time, so it should be good to go there. Boom. So now I'm going to go back in, and I'm going to do the same thing for the rest of the videos within this sequence. And once I'm done with that, I'm gonna check back in with you guys in 2 seconds. All right, so here we go. Now, Here's where exporting via the Adobe Media Encoder has another added benefit to it. One of the biggest things about this is it actually exports a lot faster. I mentioned this in my other video, but I need to say this again. When we say render playback engine GPU, what it's using is the actual GPU, not the CPU. So your graphics card is what's driving the exporting aspect of this Adobe Media Encoder when it's set to this area here. CPU is completely different processing. It's what's allowing us to work in Premiere and have that type of speed. It's why your CPU processing speed, how many threads you have are important. It's why your RAM's important, right? But when we talk about video RAM and we talk about your graphics card, this is where it really starts to come into play in exporting here and in working in Adobe After Effects as well. So doing motion graphic stuff. So because we've selected the GPU, it's going to export faster. When I say faster, it's literally almost half of the time it would take for you to export if you did it within Premiere itself, okay? The other aspect of this, I mentioned this in my other video as well, but it bears repeating, is that once I've exported it via Adobe Media Encoder, that's its own second program that's using GPU speed and processing to export stuff. I can go back into Premiere itself and keep working on things, setting up the next batch of renders, or maybe even setting up my next sequence so that I can keep my workflow going rather than just sitting there and waiting for this thing to finish exporting and then having to load the next export up without having it kind of render in a queue and batch render in and of itself. This is a really, really handy tool. I use this all of the time. Literally, there's not an export that I do that doesn't go through the Adobe Media Encoder, unless it's like a 2-second export, because of the speed, the versatility, and how I can kind of dynamically send things and or duplicate other exports out. And it's just faster. It really is faster. I've clocked it multiple occasions, whether it's a multicam sequence, different types of resolutions, 4K, 1080, blah, blah. It's almost half the time every single time. 60% of the time it works all of the time. This is really my workflow, and it's sped up my time a lot. It's made me a lot more efficient, a lot more effective as an editor. I'm gonna go ahead and click render on these things, and we're gonna just watch it crank through. But hopefully you guys dug this one. If you did, give it a thumbs up, like, share. We all know the nonsense that you're gonna do. Tune into the other videos here in the series of how to video edit for beginners. I'm not 100% sure what I call it. Every time it changes in my head. But there's a playlist that I'll kick over at the end of this video that you can keep kind of churning through. I hope you guys really enjoyed this. Again, this is Robert Teegarden, another video editing tutorial, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Deuces.